Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you back to our event. We have a very, very exciting speaker. This is somebody that I've been reading his books and his research for many, many years. My background here on this is very, very deep, and it's a subject that's dear to my heart and dear to my family's heart, and that is guns and the ability of people to defend themselves, which is if not the most essential right of nature to be able to defend yourself. I don't know what is. And so the Second Amendment is very dear to me, and I'm very, very happy to have Mr. John R. Lott. Actually, it's Dr. John R. Lott. He has a PhD in economics from UCLA. So we're very, very excited to have Dr. Lott. I'll call you John if that's okay.
That's fine.
All right. And John, we're very, very happy to have you here today to talk about this. And I think you're best known for your first book, which was More Guns, Less Crime. And I think that's a well-titled book. Why don't you start out by telling people what drove you to this area of research as an economist? How did you get into the gun control issue?
Well, I've done a lot of work on crime. Economics is, there's a couple points to it, but one of the main points of economics is that if something's more costly, people do less of it. If the price of apples go up, people buy fewer apples. But the same thing applies to many areas of human behavior. So if you make it riskier for criminals to go and commit crime, they commit fewer crimes. So, to me, over this last year, the big increase that we've seen in murders and violent crime in major urban cities in the country doesn't really take rocket science to figure out. You have jails and prisons in many of these areas releasing half or more of the inmates that they had. You had police being ordered to stand down. You had police budgets being cut in many places, from Los Angeles to New York to Chicago to Minneapolis. You had prosecutors in places like Los Angeles and St. Louis and Chicago refusing to prosecute violent criminals.
Yeah.
So, is it really surprising that when criminals aren't being arrested for committing crime, or that those who are arrested aren't being prosecuted, commit more crime then, because it's not risky for them to go and do so? So anyway, I was chief economist at the US Sentencing Commission during the late 1980s. And I'd done a lot of research on crime, but I'd never really been very interested in the gun control issue. I was teaching a class on crime at the Wharton Business School. And I was there for a number of years. And I had a class where I made the mistake of telling the students that we were ahead in the syllabus. And I had a couple students come up to me after class and say, well, if you're ahead in the syllabus, would you mind going and talking a little bit about gun control? They said that they realized that it wasn't really directly related to the class material that we're going through, but it's still crime. And I said, well, I guess I could talk about that a little bit. And it kind of forced me to have to go through and read more of the literature. I'd read some of the literature in the area. They had been very poorly done, but I kind of figured, well, there must be better papers out there someplace. And that kind of forced me to kind of look through it. But they were also pretty bad. Very small studies. None of the existing research had tried to account for any type of impact of law enforcement on crime. And I mean, I could go and talk to you for hours about the problems that are there with the existing studies. And so when you're an academic, you do research either because you have a new idea, which was like about 95% of the work that I did, or you simply thought that you could do a better job. This fell into that latter category. And so I started working on it. I almost stopped about 6 times because I wasn't very interested in the topic. Anyway, in '96, I was at the University of Chicago and was just finished up the paper that I was working on. And I got a call from a reporter at USA Today called Dennis Cushon. I'd gotten to know him when I was chief economist at the Sentencing Commission. And Dennis would call me up every 9 months or whatever, ask me some questions. So he called me up, asked me some questions, and at the end he said, "Oh, by the way, what are you working on?" And I said, "Well, I just finished this paper." And he said, "Oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Why don't I send it to him?" And so I sent it to him, and a week later it was on the front page of USA Today. And we were kind of off to the races at that point. A lot of people attacked my work, and I responded to that. So that took some time. But one of the things that happened was I'd been involved in a lot of academic debates, but this was different. I'd never seen so much kind of really dishonest claims being made by both academics and others about guns. And I kind of convinced myself that if I didn't speak out on this, what I was finding, nobody would do that.
Yeah.
So I kind of ended up getting stuck in the debate much longer than I would have thought I would have.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot longer. I think you're going to continue because there really isn't anybody that's taken a look at it the way you have.
Well,
And
that's much
proven.
destroyed my academic career.
Yeah.
When I was at the University of Chicago, my book, More Guns, Less Crime, came out in May of 1998. In November of 98, Mayor Daley, Richard Daley, called up Hugo Sonnenschein, who was the president of the University of Chicago. And according to what I was told, spent like 45 minutes talking about all the wonderful things that the city wanted to do at the university. But at the end of the discussion, he said, but Lott's continued presence at the university was going to do, quote, irreparable harm to the relationship between the city and the school. And so Hugo basically demanded that I kind of get removed from the university. And, this was a University of Chicago book, More Guns, Less Crime. And Hugo had also complained that my research had made it more difficult for him to raise money and other things for the university, which I have no idea whether that was
couldn't that have been a lawsuit?
Well, I'm not sure if one wants to keep getting jobs in academia that you want to go and do that type of thing. I didn't have a tenured position at the time. Anyway, I went from there to Yale, and I had something similar happen at Yale. Anyway, I could go on with other stories, but it's
basically ended your career in academia. It looks like
it had a big impact.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd been at Wharton, had been at Stanford, had been at UCLA, and other places to teach and do research. And anyway, I mean, if I'd been on the other side of the debate and a politician had called up and said, you got to get rid of somebody because he's too liberal on some issue, I have a feeling that they would have told him to go jump in the lake.
Yeah, literally right there, Lake Michigan.
Right.
Oh my goodness, John, that is really unbelievable. And if anything, the censorship and the ridicule has just ramped up to another level in the last 23, 24 years since that happened.
I mean, academia is just horrible. I have a friend of mine who I've known since we both taught at UCLA. He's a professor at Harvard Law School. And he had a couple papers that were published earlier this year on the comfort women from Korea, where he had gotten a hold of contracts that they had with the Japanese. And it was really eye-opening because you have this image that somehow these comfort women were kind of forcibly taken to go and take care of the Japanese troops. But in fact, there was a lot of negotiations. They would be paid maybe the equivalent of $100,000 up front. They would negotiate how long they would do it and where they would do it, what their pay would be when they did it. And, anyway, he published the papers, and there was a big outcry in academia. There was something like 1,800 historians that had demanded that the journals unpublish his papers. There was like over 1,000 academic economists who had signed a letter demanding the same thing. And I thought, this is really weird. I mean, if you disagree with somebody, you don't demand that the journal unpublish the paper. That's not the way academic debate goes on. I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't read Korean or Japanese. I don't know the types of contracts that were being used. But I tried writing up a letter that just said, look, if you disagree with somebody, you write a comment, the journal will referee it. And then if they decide to publish it, the author will be given a chance to respond. That's how we learn who's right or wrong on these issues. You don't just go and demand that the journals unpublish his papers. And I sent it around to hundreds of academics. I only got like 7 who were willing to sign it. I got a few dozen who wrote me back and said, John, I agree with this completely. It's just ridiculous. I mean, you're right. If you disagree with somebody, you should write a comment on it and engage in academic debate rather than censoring them. But if I sign this and it gets out that I signed this, people are going to destroy me at the university, which is just unbelievable. I mean, we're in a situation in the world where simply saying, engage in an academic debate with somebody that you disagree with is beyond the pale now, supposedly.
I know. I think what's going to happen eventually, as from an economist, see if you would agree with this, but at some point, people in this country are going to realize that these colleges are getting so far left that people are going to want to stop sending their kids there.
Well, I don't know, when you say getting there, I think they've already gotten past that point.
Right.
I don't know, about 17 years ago or so, there was a survey of the top 100 law schools. I've taught in econ departments, business schools, law schools. There's a survey in the top 100 law schools. And 93% of the faculty were registered as Democrats. 4% were registered as Republicans. And what I try to explain to people is that that really understates the imbalance. And the reason, you think 93-4, how can that understate the imbalance? But the thing is, in order to get tenure, you have to have essentially a 2/3 vote of the faculty to be able to get tenure. So you can be a kooky left-winger and be so nutty that even 1/3 of the Democrats think that you're nutty and won't support you. But you'll still get tenure. Yeah. But if you're a Republican, you have to get 2/3 of the Democrats to support you in order to go and get tenure. Yeah. And so essentially what that means is that the only Republicans who get tenure are ones who have really no political views or don't hold them strongly or are actually pretty liberal Republicans more likely. Right. And, it's, and also they don't teach kind of what would be regarded as the important classes. You don't see Republicans as teaching constitutional law or something. Republicans are relegated to things like tax law or some type of corporate law or something like that. But it's a relatively small ghetto within law schools. And the thing is, most of the law school students, most students in general, have no clue about how biased the professors are. They don't know what topics can be picked. They don't know what arguments are available on each side. They have no idea whether a straw argument's being put up as for the conservative side that are there. When I would teach, I try to provide the strongest arguments on both sides. I couldn't provide a straw argument on the liberal side because if I did that, they would get the stronger arguments later on. I needed to kind of make sure the students were exposed to the arguments on both sides and as strong. And in fact, I'd sometimes even make the argument stronger than what would have normally been presented by the other side. And, and I tried to be very apolitical in the class. But now, I've had kids attend Ivy League schools where math teachers go into political discussions, and you have other things which are really outrageous. When I was a professor, something like that would have been immediately
Unheard of.
frowned on.
Yeah.
The thing is, when I first got out, academia was overwhelmingly liberal. But the thing is, you had a lot of kind of old style liberals there who, even if they disagreed with you,
They
would,
still believed in free speech.
but they would still be interested in the process of talking to you about
Right.
this stuff.
Right.
The newer people that came in were over time more and more or less willing to kind of entertain alternative viewpoints.
Right.
And they would not just disagree with you, but they would think that you were evil for having those alternative viewpoints that were there. Most of academia has no clue how insulated they are. They hang around with each other, they talk to each other, and they're shocked when anybody even has an alternative viewpoint because one, they've almost never heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's get back to the gun issue then.
Sure.
I mean, we pretty well agree on academic, and I think everybody listening here knows what's happened to our schools, and it's sad. But on the issue of more gun, less crime. I think that was the first thing you did, was show that the states that had the first states that implemented the carry laws, the crime was going down, correct? Isn't that one of the first things you did?
Right. I mean, the book looks at 13 different types of gun control, but right, the main focus was on right to carry laws.
Mm-hmm.
And what you found is that the states that issued the most permits saw the biggest drops in violent crime rates. Over time, as more permits were issued in a state, you saw continued drops in violent crime rates. And it was particularly true for two groups of people. The people who benefited the most were the people who most likely victims of violent crime. It was overwhelmingly poor Blacks who live in high crime urban areas, and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. Men benefit from having a gun, but you're almost always talking about a male criminal doing the attack. And when a man is attacking a woman, there's a much larger strength difference that exists there than when a man is attacking another man. And so a presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in a woman's ability to go and protect herself
Right.
than it does for a man.
Well, that makes common sense that would happen, but you found that statistics actually prove that out.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'll just make one other general point. One of the things I also have in the book is just to look around at different countries and the world. And, if you think on net guns are bad, you would think having a gun ban, banning all guns or all handguns should be associated with, let's say, drops in murder and homicide rates or drops in suicide rates.
Right.
In fact, what you find is that every single place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns, whether it be Chicago and Washington, D.C., or whether it be even island nations, has seen big increases in murder rates after a ban has gone into effect. You'd think out of randomness, once or twice, when you see a ban go into effect, you'd see murder rates go down or at least stay the same. And every single time they went up. And there's actually a fairly simple explanation for this, and that is when you institute a ban, it's the most law-abiding good citizens who turn in their guns. And you may take some guns away from criminals, but if you primarily are disarming the potential victims that are there, you make it relatively easier for criminals to go and commit crimes. And so it's very common to see 3-fold, 5-, 7-fold increases in murder and homicide rates after gun bans have gone into effect.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's absolutely, totally counterproductive. Yet they continue to call for gun bans. So, the work you're doing is really critical. And, I can see why they attack you. And, we need more of this, though, don't we? I mean, we need a lot more so that this can really be proven, because, it's very clear that people are less safe when they can't protect themselves with their own firearms.
Right. Well, I mean, Yeah, unfortunately, the Crime Prevention Research Center, which I set up with some other academics, I mean, our budget's a couple $100,000 a year. Uh, you have Bloomberg literally just by himself spending hundreds of millions of dollars on financing gun control research. You have Soros, you have the Arnold Foundation out of Texas, which is giving like $50 million to finance gun control research. You have, the federal government has been giving out many, many tens of millions of dollars to go and finance gun control research. And they pretty much, all that money is going to people on one side of the debate that's there. And they know what they're doing. They basically know that if they put out studies, it's going to get uncritical news coverage that's there. And, it's kind of like Chinese water torture, just putting out these studies, no matter how poorly done they are. I have a couple books that go through a lot of these studies. One's The War on Guns that I published in 2016 that goes through a lot of these so-called public health type studies and just kind of explains to people what the problems are and why they got the types of claims that they did. And my latest book, Gun Control Myths, goes through some of those too.
Well, I think that they kind of, this last year, all of the hundreds of millions that they probably spent on this were kind of wasted, because with their Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots and the destruction and the looting and the criminal behavior of these people, I think so many people just went on a gun buying spree. And so I think more guns have been sold this year than ever before, right?
Last year, that was true. And this year, it seems to be even higher. Look,
yeah,
people think police are extremely important, but they saw this last year that the police weren't allowed to do their jobs. They saw that the prosecutors weren't willing to go and convict people. And so a lot of people who had never owned guns before went out and bought guns for the first time. One thing that you're seeing is this move for constitutional carry states. We were talking before about right to carry laws. There are 20 states now that no longer require that you have to get a permit to be able to carry. And one thing that was interesting this last year, which I think created the fuel for the constitutional carry, was that 20 states basically stopped issuing permits because of the coronavirus, or virtually stopped issuing permits. And so you had this big increase in crime that was occurring, that people weren't able to depend upon the police to be able to protect themselves. And then they decide, well, maybe I should go and get a concealed handgun permit so I can go and protect myself and my family. And then they found that the state,
not giving out permits.
Whether it's Florida or Michigan or Georgia or other places, had stopped giving out permits. And so, people realize that there are some problems with having to depend on it. There are other issues there. Even in the best of times, it may take like 60 days in Texas or 90 days in Louisiana to go and get a permit.
Right.
And so if you're a woman who's being stalked or threatened, you may not have the luxury of waiting 90 days or so.
So these people instead, they started pushing for constitutional carry in their states.
That's right.
Yeah, and that worked. I know Iowa just did that this last year. And,
right. Well, I mean, this year there's been Tennessee, Utah, Montana, Iowa. You have Texas. Looks close to doing it. It's going to be. It's passed both the House and the Senate there, but it's slightly different versions, and they're debating on it. But I hope they can pass it. And Louisiana is something very similar happening there. So you could have two more states that could enact it.
Well, here in Florida, we don't have it yet, but it's so easy to get a concealed carry permit.
Well, normally it is, but the director for agriculture that you have, I guess.
Yeah.
And this last year, she basically used the coronavirus as shutting down, or virtually shutting down, the issuing of permits.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's tough. But people are still buying. I mean, you go to the gun stores right now and they're in the ranges. They're really doing a great business this year here in Florida. So I'm sure
I
it's,
mean, there are lots of regulations that Biden is pushing that are going to make it harder for people to buy guns, some that they may not notice as much. You know, you may remember Operation Choke Point at the end of the Obama administration, where the federal government would put pressure on financial institutions not to do business with companies that the Obama administration didn't approve of.
right.
Uh, Trump had ended that policy and was in the process of finalizing rules that would prevent the federal government from discriminating against companies that were legal companies producing a legal product. Unfortunately, the final version of those anti-discrimination rules were supposed to be published in the Federal Register in February this year. And right before they were published, which is required to kind of make them go into effect, the Biden administration pulled them. And also, you know, there are things that they can do in order to stop the importation of guns and ammunition. You know, and how hard it is in many places to go and buy guns and ammunition now because of the big increase in sales that have been occurring. But, you know, just imagine how much more difficult that would be if you have 20% of gun sales, which are imports, are stopped as a result of executive orders from the Biden administration.
Well, I think it's an issue that is making a lot of people wake up because it's not all conservative Republicans buying these guns. You
Right.
know,
But you know, you have seen some changes. The biggest increase in concealed handgun permits over the last 8 to 10 years has been women. Have increased much faster than men. They're still less than men, but the rate of increase for women has been almost twice the rate of increase for men in permits. And also for minorities, particularly blacks. Blacks, the growth rate for permits for blacks over the last decade has been about 20% faster than the growth rate for whites. And you know, as we mentioned earlier, those are two of the groups that benefit the most from having. You know, to me, the interesting thing is Democrats will go and say how much they care about women and how much they care about minorities. But the types of gun control laws that they put out actually stop them from being able to go and buy guns more than and use guns more than other people.
yeah.
You know, you take something like background checks on private transfers of guns, these so-called universal background checks, which has passed the House and is before the Senate right now. You know, everybody wants to stop dangerous, prohibited people from being able to go and get guns. But few people realize what a mess the current background check system is. You know, you'll hear claims that there have been 3.5 million dangerous people that have been stopped from buying guns because of background checks. That's simply false. What they should say is there have been 3.5 million initial denials, and about 99% of those were mistakes. It's one thing to stop a felon from buying a gun. It's another thing to stop somebody simply because they have a name similar to a felon from buying a gun. And the thing is, the mistakes are overwhelmingly against minority males. I was just working in the Department of Justice up until January, and I got to see some data on this. The thing is, people tend to have names similar to others in their racial groups. Hispanics have names similar to their Hispanics. Blacks tend to have names similar to other blacks. 33% of black males are legally prohibited from owning a gun because of a felony conviction that they have. Whose names are their names most likely to be confused with? Other law-abiding black males. The mistake rate for black males is 3 times their share of the population, okay? For Hispanics, it's like 2.5 times their share, Hispanic males, 2.5 times their share of the population. There's no reason why these mistakes should be occurring. When private companies do background checks on employees, if they have an error rate that's 100, the error rate that the federal government has in doing their background checks, they would be sued out of existence. All you have to do is have a rule or a law that would require that the federal government has to meet the same standards for doing background checks, criminal background checks,
The private enterprise.
companies have to meet. But
Yeah.
Democrats will fight you tooth and nail against that. But that's not the only problem. I'll give you one other example, and that is the cost of these background checks. You normally don't see the cost of a background check because it's not like a sales tax that
Right.
gets added on top of the price of the gun. When you go to a gun store and you buy a gun and they do a background check, it's just a cost of them selling the gun. It's part of the price. In Washington, D.C., where they're voting on this, for example, it costs $125 to do a background check on a private transfer of a gun. And just to give you an idea how nutty this is, let's say you and I lived in D.C., and I'm going to transfer 4 guns to you. It's just you and me, just 2 people involved in all 4 of the gun transfers. You would think since there's just 2 people, there's just going to be 1 background check. But no, in many states, and including DC, they require a separate background check on each gun. So rather than costing $125 for me to go and transfer the guns to you, it would cost $500.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that may not stop you or I from being able to get a gun, but the very people that we talked about before who benefit the most, the people who are most likely victims of violent crime, poor Blacks who live in high crime urban areas, $125 may make the difference between whether or not they can legally obtain a gun to protect themselves and their families. Here's the arguments I make to gun control people. I've been making this for 20 years. I said, look, you believe that background checks reduce crime. I don't, but you believe that. Well, if you believe that, you think that they reduce it for everybody, not just the law-abiding individual who's going out of their way to go and obey the law on the private transfer of guns. If you believe everybody benefits, as an economist, I would say whoever benefits should pay. Make everybody pay for it out of general revenue. Why make the law-abiding citizen who's obeying the law have to bear the full freight of that cost?
Right.
The second thing is, if you think these background checks are good, supposedly you want to encourage people to go and do the background checks. Do you think making them have to pay what's essentially a $125 tax on making the transfer is encouraging people to go and make the transfer that's there to obey the law? And the answer is no. I'm not saying you should subsidize them, though that would be logical in this case. What you want to do is at least don't tax them. Again, if you believe that these are good, if you want to encourage people to do it and you think it's beneficial, pay for it out of general revenue. Democrats and gun control people will fight you tooth and nail on either making the federal government have to meet the same standards for background checks that private companies have to meet, or on who pays for it. And, you know, they claim that they care about minorities, and yet these are the types of rules that they're making it very difficult. I'll give you one other different example. There are 7 states which are called so-called May issue states. Florida is a right to carry state. The difference is that in Florida, once you've met certain objective criteria, you're a certain age, you pass a criminal background check, you pay your fee, you do your training. Once you've met those, then it's up to you whether or not you want to go and get a concealed handgun permit. In these other 7 May issue states, you have to go through all those things, and then in addition, have to go and explain to somebody why you should be able to go and carry. You have to give them a good reason. It's the case that's coming up before the Supreme Court in October with New York's law, where they issued very few permits because they require, I mean, Florida's like over 2 million concealed handgun permits.
Right.
But, you know, in New York, you're talking about 0.1% of the population with a permit. And that's because they just don't accept the good reasons.
Yeah.
Los Angeles County, a few years ago, I got a list of all the 216 concealed carry permit holders in Los Angeles County. 216 out of like 8.5 million adults. Well, the thing is, the people, who do you think they give the permits to? It's basically extremely wealthy, politically connected white males.
Yeah.
Women in Los Angeles County make up about 7% of permit holders. Nationwide, it's about 30%. Hispanics make up a little bit over 6% of permit holders. 54% of the population in Los Angeles County is Hispanic, but yet only 6% of the permit holders are Hispanic. Blacks only get 5% of the concealed handgun permits. Nationwide, it's like over 13%. So,
Wow.
is it just that women don't have crimes committed against them in Los Angeles County as compared to the rest of the country? Is it the Hispanics or Blacks don't have to worry about crimes in Los Angeles County as compared to the rest of the country? And the answer is no. It's just that the Democrats who are in charge of deciding who has, quote, a good reason to be able to go and get a concealed handgun permit have decided that those individuals don't have good reasons for being able to go and get a concealed handgun permit relative to others. Is it great that wealthy people who are politically connected feel the need to be able to get a permit and can get it? Fine. I'm glad that they can go and do it. But I guarantee you, they're not the ones who are the most likely victims of violent crime. They're not the ones who would benefit the most from having the option to be able to go and protect themselves and their families. And yet, when you allow that type of discretion, the politicians who can make those decisions have decided that they're the ones who have good reasons, not the ones who are most likely victims of violent crime.
Yet another reason for people of color in this country to vote against Democrats, because they're really not helping them at all. It's just the opposite. Everything they do is really hurting them.
Well, you look at the crime this year. I mean, where do you think these riots have occurred? They've occurred in relatively heavily Black areas. What businesses are being destroyed? Some of them are owned by Blacks, but Blacks make up a disproportionate number of workers in those areas. They're the ones who shop at those stores. You have the stores and businesses being destroyed in those areas. That means that they have to travel further to work or to shop if they can go and get jobs. It means the value of their property, if they owned a house in those areas, has gone down because of the destruction that's occurred there and the higher insurance premiums that they're going to have to go and pay. Who do they think is being harmed by telling the police to stand down? Who do they think is being harmed by cutting police budgets or not prosecuting violent criminals? Who do they think are the most likely victims of the violent crime that's occurring in those areas that's been allowed to explode because of what Democrats have done to law enforcement in those areas?
It's horrible. Let's, in our remaining time, let's talk about some of the myths. Your latest book, which is it been released yet, or is it just coming out soon?
It was released end of last year.
Okay, so that's your newest book, Gun Control Myths. What are some of the major myths that you cover in that book?
Oh, I mean, there's literally several dozen.
Well, what's the top? What are the top?
Yeah, no, I was gonna get there, but so I suppose one of the bigger myths is the claim that the United States is somehow unique in terms of mass public shootings. That's simply false. The United States makes up about 4.6% of the world population, but we make up just 1% of the mass public shooters in the world. There are many countries in Europe, France, Norway, Finland, Switzerland, as well as countries like Russia and Eastern Europe, many countries that have much higher death rates from mass public shootings in the United States. The thing is, these attacks in many other countries don't get that much news attention. Right. My guess is few people would know that if you compare Western Europe, not even Eastern Europe or Russia, but Western Europe with the United States over the last decade, do you know where the worst mass public shooting has occurred?
Where? In London, England?
In Paris, France,
okay.
in November 2015, at the concert hall where 130 people were murdered. Do you know where the second worst mass public shooting between the United States and Europe occurred?
Where?
It occurred in Norway in July 2011, in which, if you ignore the bombing deaths, 67 people were murdered. And, but you look at a country like Germany, over the last 20 years or so, Germany's had some of the very worst K through 12 school shootings that have occurred. My guess is relatively few people would know that.
Now we're talking about countries with strict gun control, right?
Yeah, right. Well, France, for example, you essentially ban semi-automatic guns. It takes over a year to go through the process to go and get a gun permit. In Germany, it takes over a year also to go and get a gun permit. Uh, the guns that were used in the worst mass public shooting were all illegal guns. Um, it's when you get outside of Europe, the rate of mass public shootings is much, much higher than either the United States or Europe, but they just don't get coverage. People know about the mosque shooting in New Zealand, in which more than 50
Oh, I
people were
remember that.
killed,
Right.
which was also worse than anything we've had here in the United States. But would you know, for example, that within less than 24 hours of that, there was a big school shooting in Brazil? Would you know that there was a mass public shooting in the Netherlands that also had occurred within less than 24 hours of that? No, I mean, the reason why the mosque shooting, I think, got such major attention was it fit, or at least they thought it fit, the political narrative. They wanted to go and claim that the guy was a white supremacist, that he was a conservative of some type, which is simply false. If you go and read his manifesto, which got censored immediately, what you find is that the guy was, he believed communist China was his ideal country. He wanted the whole world to be based on the communist Chinese model. He was an extreme environmentalist. The reason why he hated minorities was because he said minorities had too many kids, and that imposed a strain on the environment.
Well, that doesn't fit their narrative, does it?
No, but you would look in vain to see anything. I actually had my Twitter account locked down because I had tweeted a link to a discussion about some of the quotes from the guy's manifesto. It's just amazing the censorship that occurred on that. The media, the mainstream media, from the New York Times, the Washington Post, to USA Today, to others, kept on parroting the claim that the guy was somehow a far right guy.
So the bottom line here is that first myth on that the U.S. is where all the mass shootings occur, and that's because we have so many guns, is completely false.
It's completely false. We are well below the world average, below the world
All
average.
right. So what's the second myth that you would say? Second biggest one.
Things like the gun ownership leads to suicides or something.
Okay.
That somehow if you only take away a person's guns, you'll go and make it so that suicides won't occur. As we talked about earlier, there's a number of places where guns have been banned. You would think if handguns, which are the primary way that people use a gun to commit suicide, a handgun ban, you should see drops in suicides. You can look around the world. There's no place that you can find where there's been a handgun ban and you've seen the suicide rate have a statistically significant change. It basically stays the same from what it was before. People switch into other ways of committing suicide. There's so many laws that are getting pushed, like these red flag laws that you have in Florida, for example.
Yeah, horrible.
The claim is they're overwhelmingly used for suicide cases. And the claim is, well, if you only get rid of the person's gun, which is all the red flag laws do, is to get rid of a person's gun, then you'll solve the problem. And it's ridiculous. If somebody's suicidal, there are so many different ways for them to commit suicide that they actually do use if a gun's not available, assuming that they couldn't illegally get a gun if that's what they wanted to do. You actually have a law in Florida called the Baker Act, which has been around since the 70s, which is much more useful. Because what happens with the Baker Act is there's a whole range of things that the judge can do. The first thing is you're given a psychiatric evaluation where two psychiatrists look at you. And then there's an immediate hearing, and the judge then determines in a hearing where you're allowed to have a lawyer, and if you can't afford one once provided, to go and determine whether you're a danger to yourself or others. And then the judge has a whole range of options. You can have, voluntary psychiatric treatment. You can have If he thinks that that doesn't work, you have an involuntary, they can take away your guns, they can do whatever they want to do there. But, you know, the whole reason why gun control people push red flag laws is they want to kind of condition people to think that if you only take away the gun, which is the only thing, as I say, red flag laws can do, then somehow you've solved the problem. Then the people aren't a danger to themselves or others. And it doesn't deal with the root cause of the problem. There's a reason why when these red flag laws get passed, you don't see any drop. In fact, there's some evidence you actually see an increase in suicides. And it's easy to explain why that's the case. I have a very close friend of mine who's the executive director for the Crime Prevention Research Center. Her husband was murdered in front of her by one of her stalkers. And after her husband was murdered, she was obviously extremely depressed. Now, under these red flag laws, you could have somebody who's well-meaning, who could say, look, Nikki's depressed, she owns a gun, I'm concerned. All the judge would see in front of him is the complaint, and that's all he has to decide on. There's no hearing, there's no mental health evaluation that's there. And he could say, okay, she's depressed and she has a gun, we should take it away from her. Under the Baker Act, she could go and explain to the mental health care experts that, look, if you take away my gun, I'm going to feel really vulnerable. I just had one of my stalkers murder my husband in front of me. Yeah. What am I going to do if you do that? And here's the thing that's not taken into account, and that is, if you're worried that even a well-meaning person might go and put in a filing on you, what does that do to your willingness to go and talk to other people? Is that good? Do we want people to be afraid to go and talk to other people? And it's just not her case. Take police officers. Police officers tend to be depressed at a relatively high rate compared to the general population.
Right.
They commit suicide at relatively high rates. But if you take away a police officer's gun, you've essentially ended his career. Do we want to have a situation where police officers are afraid to share their feelings with other people because somebody well-meaning might go and put in a complaint, a filing there that would have a judge who would get no input from the officer to explain what's going on, just like with no input from Nikki? And the other thing is, even when they do eventually, let's say a month later, have a hearing, you talk to lawyers, it regularly costs like $10,000 to go and hire a lawyer to do this hearing. So I may want to keep my guns. I may think it's very important. But if the only thing that can happen to me by losing this case is that they take away my guns, is it going to be worth $10,000 to me to have to go and pay for that? A lot of people, in fact, virtually no one who goes through this process has legal representation when they go through it. Because if the worst that can happen is taking away my guns, and even if I value them, I don't value them at $10,000. Even if I have the money, I'm not going to spend $10,000 on them.
Yeah. That's really sick. It really is. Is there any kind of movement to get rid of these red flag laws?
Unfortunately, there's not as much as I would like. I mean, there's some move. Unfortunately, it's going to have to be legislative. Yeah. But with the Democrats controlling Congress and the presidency, if anything, there's a push in the other direction. Biden has said multiple times now he wants to kind of have model red flag laws. He wants to provide financial carrots and sticks for the remaining states to force them to go and adopt red flag laws themselves. Yeah. And, you know, often most of the people who criticize red flag laws say, look, you know, you need due process, you need to have a hearing, you need to provide maybe financial things, you know, for people who can't afford a lawyer. To me, that kind of misses the point. I agree that those are problems.
Yeah, misses the point by a lot.
But the ultimate thing is, if you're really concerned about somebody being a danger to themselves or others, simply focusing on guns misses the bottom line issue there. You need to deal with the underlying problem. And that's what every state already has a Baker Act type law there. And maybe you want to make some fine tuning on that. That's fine. But there's a reason why the gun control people don't want to do that. They want to have a whole new law. And the reason why they want to do that is they like the fact that there are not civil liberties protections in there. They like the fact that the only thing it concentrates on, the only thing that it involves is taking away a gun, because that demonizes the guns per se and make people think, well, it's easy just to solve problems just by taking away a gun.
Yeah.
Mental health treatment and other things, evaluations. In fact, if you look at these laws, none of the red flag laws actually mandate or require that you have to have a mental health evaluation at any stage in the process, let alone before you first take away the person's guns. In fact, there's only 2 states that even mention mental health at all, and it's only in passing, and it's not central to the laws that are there.
Wow. All right. Well, what's a third? What would you say would be a third big myth about gun ownership?
Well, I mean, there are lots of things I could say. For example, if you look across countries, the countries that have the most gun ownership have the lowest homicide or murder rates.
Yeah.
Over time, the thing that we mentioned before, that every place that's banned a gun over time. I mean, there's one reason for looking over time across lots of places is that there's huge differences across places. People will often go and point to the UK and compare it to the United States.
Right.
They'll say, look, the UK has very few homicides compared to the United States, and they have very strict gun control. So it must be because of the strict gun control that they have low homicide rates. The UK had very low homicide rates, even much lower, before they had any gun control laws. The first gun control laws they had in the UK were 1920. You look after each of the major gun control laws, they either had no change in murder or it went up. After the handgun ban in 97, the homicide rate over the next 8 years increased by 50%. It only fell back down then after that, after they had a huge increase of about 18% of the number of police officers in the country. But the point is that when they banned guns, their homicide rate went up relative to the United States. It was still lower than the United States, but that's because there were other things that were different across the countries. There are lots of reasons why crime rates vary across different types of places. Right. The same thing is true with Japan. Japan, as far as we know, has had low homicide rates as long back as there's data that's available there. And so just saying, well, Japan has strict gun control and they have a low homicide rate misses the fact that
they've always had a low homicide rate.
Right.
For
before
centuries.
they had the gun control laws that are there. And so that's one reason why I think it's so powerful that every single place, every place that's banned either all guns or all handguns. I mean, this applies to gun control generally, but it's just a simple example with handgun bans or gun bans. You see an increase in murder and homicide rates.
Yeah. No, that's tremendous. It's tremendous work that you're doing, John. And is the book doing pretty well? This book?
It's doing okay. But people can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org for the Crime Prevention Research Center, crimeresearch.org.
Okay. Crimeresearch.org, everybody. Go to that site, get his books, get the word out. This is a crucial issue right now with everything that's going on in our country. And you can see why cities like Chicago are the ones where the gun sales are going up the most. That's where I'm from, by the way.
Okay.
And,
I lived in Chicago for a while. I was at the University of Chicago, but
yeah. And you can see people are just scared to death there. And to talk about
they're destroying the city. They're destroying the city.
Totally destroying the city. Yeah. It's really insane. Well, let's hope that your books and our work here and this summit that we're doing here will restore some sanity to our country and get people going in a different direction here, because banning guns is not the answer, folks. It never has been and it never will be.
Well, even these regulations, just in general, the point needs to be, who are they harming? Who are they stopping? We all want to stop criminals from doing it, but I've come to believe, unfortunately, over time, that that's not really what they're aiming at. what they're mainly aiming at is just trying to stop law-abiding people, making it difficult and costly for them to be able to go and get guns. I'll give you one last thing before I go, and that is, look at Mexico. I mean, this applies generally across countries, but Mexico literally only has a couple tenths of 1% of the adult population of Mexico is legally licensed to own a gun. Mexico, since 1973, has had only one gun store in the country. It's illegal for you to sell somebody else a gun. You have to buy it from this one gun store, which is run by the military, and you have to sell it back to them when you are going to get rid of the gun.
Oh my goodness.
And yet, despite those, and the most powerful gun you can buy is a 22 caliber short round rifle.
Oh my goodness.
And yet Mexico has a murder rate that's 6 times higher than the murder rate that we have in the United States. When I was, a few years ago, I testified before the Mexican Senate and House Constitution Committees. And I was talking to some federal senators there, and they were telling me about all the death threats and other things that they get. The security was just overwhelming there. But they weren't, even these senators could not get a permit to be able to go and carry a gun. It just, it just was ridiculous.
So the murder rate was 6 times.
Right.
They have the strictest gun controls, it sounds like, almost in the world, or about that. And
right.
So what is it? Is it the black market for guns is so big?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, what people don't appreciate, even in the United States, is how much illegal drugs have to do with the sources of guns.
Right.
Drug dealers have to have guns. And the reason why they have guns is it's not like they can go to the police and say, look, this other drug dealer stole our drugs. Can you help us get them back? They have to essentially set up their own little militaries in order to protect that extremely valuable property that they have. And so, if I could click my fingers and cause all illegal drugs to disappear from the United States and all guns, how long do you think it would be before illegal drugs would start coming back into the US? If you're in El Paso, 20 minutes, something like that?
Yeah.
How long do you think it would be before they would bring in the weapons that they need in order to protect that valuable property?
Right.
They'd be bringing it in at the same time.
Right. And also people that want to protect themselves are going to buy an illegal gun to protect themselves, to protect their family.
The problem is the most law-abiding citizens won't do that.
Yeah.
And so what you've done is you make it so the best people, the ones who obey the law,
are the least able to defend themselves.
Right. I keep on giving one more. This will be the last example.
All right.
I mentioned
this is great.
I mentioned the executive director for the Crime Prevention Research Center, Nikki Gozer, before, where her husband was killed, was in a gun-free zone. She carried with her regularly a permanent concealed handgun, but she also obeyed the law. She and her husband at the time were working, doing karaoke to try to bring in some extra money. And at that time in Tennessee, the state law banned permanent concealed handguns in establishments that served, in restaurants that served any alcohol. And so she obeyed the law. She left her permanent concealed handgun in her car outside the restaurant. The problem is that the stalker didn't obey the law. He took advantage of the fact that everybody else in that restaurant was disarmed because they were obeying the law. What's not appreciated is how these types of gun-free zones actually encourage attacks. When you have these mass public shootings, these attackers may be crazy, but they're not stupid. They go and they want to try to kill as many people as possible. And so where do they go? They go to places where they know the victims can't defend themselves.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
And, even if you have one police officer who might be there, the thing is, if you have an officer who's in uniform and he's known to be the only person who's going to be having a gun, who do they kill first? Who do they go after first? The officer, because they know that once they kill the officer,
they're safe.
Yeah, then they have free reign to go after everybody else that's there. If you had it so that other people there had concealed handguns, you actually make it safer for the officer that's there. because these killers know that if they go after the officer, they reveal their position and they have to worry that somebody behind them or to the side might be able to stop them.
Unbelievable. Really is unbelievable. Let's stop there. We've covered so much and we appreciate it so much. Let's give them that website one more time.
It's crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
Okay. All right. And fantastic. And I know what you've been through. We talked a little bit about before we started the interview, you know, the kind of harassment that you get and the ridicule and what you've been through at the universities and everything. And I just want to say that, you know, we really appreciate, I think every free American and every person who cares about our Constitution and our fundamental principles of freedom and you know, our right to defend ourselves for sure has got to be, if not the first, you know, law of nature in terms of our rights. Really respect what you've done and are grateful for what you've done, and we hope that you will continue. And if there's anything we can do to support you more and get the word out, we will do that.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much. And everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much. And share this video when it comes out in the summit, and which will be July. So thank you so much for coming. That was